She stumbled into the apothecary at dawn, lip split, blood on her chin, the madam's voice still ringing in her ears. Samuel said nothing as he cleaned her wounds, but when Grace whispered, "My mother sold me," he froze. In his silence, something shifted. A decision that would change everything. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. The room smelled of perfume and mildew, the kind of sweet that soured at the edges. Grace sat stiff-backed on the edge of the narrow iron bed, her hands folded in her lap like a schoolgirl awaiting punishment. The shawl was still wrapped around her shoulders, though the room was warm. It wasn't for comfort. It was for memory, a tether to something that once resembled home, even if that home had bartered her away like livestock. Downstairs, laughter swelled, low and throaty, like something from a different world. Women's voices laced with smoke and exhaustion, men's with drink and conquest. The walls were thin here. Grace could hear everything. The madame had told her, "Keep your mouth shut and your eyes pretty. You'll do fine." Her eyes had lingered too long on Grace's figure, appraising, not kind. "We get all sorts in these parts. Someone'll like the quiet type." Grace hadn't spoken a word in hours. She'd sat in the train for nearly 2 days, her knees pressed to the suitcase, watching farms blur into forests and back into fields again. She had imagined a schoolteacher's post, a cousin in Oregon who might have taken her in, the idea of running. All dismissed as quickly as they came. There was no room for rebellion in a life that hadn't belonged to her since the ink dried. And now, upstairs in a brothel, the reality of her mother's final words took root. "You're a burden." They echoed with more weight than the train whistle, heavier than her satchel. She stood up abruptly, as though the act of standing might dislodge the shame rising in her throat. The cracked mirror by the dresser caught her reflection. Pale cheeks, red-rimmed eyes, that, to adult stillness, children shouldn't know. She touched her hair, the one thing she'd been complimented on once, by a librarian back home. "Like flame on river water," the woman had said. Now it was the reason for a ribbon. A red one, like a mark. Downstairs, the piano began its clumsy tune. Someone clapped. A bottle shattered. Grace walked to the window. The brothel looked out on the alley behind the grain mill, muddy, narrow, littered with scraps. Across it, a sliver of night sky stretched between 2 brick buildings. A single star blinked through. She pressed her forehead to the glass. It was cold. Good. She wanted to feel it. Anything but this rage curled in her chest like a fire she wasn't allowed to show. The alley behind the brothel was narrow and damp, boxed in by brick walls that never dried, no matter how long the sun stayed out. It stank of spilled liquor, spoiled meat, and something darker. The kind of rot that seeps from the soul of a place, not just its gutters. Grace stood there most nights after her chores, away from the eyes that measured her worth in silence or smirks. Here, at least, she could breathe, even if the air was foul. Her hands, rough now from scrubbing and bruised from the madame's backhanded warnings, fumbled with the hem of her dress. Her fingers had started to tremble again, not from the cold, but from that slow, sinking dread that no one ever noticed until it was too late. She had mastered the art of smallness, of lowering her gaze, making herself forgettable, offering only enough to keep suspicion at bay. But even that could not protect her forever. The salve had come on a Thursday. Tin lid, plain, no label, just the faint scent of lavender and pine. She'd nearly thrown it out. Kindness, after all, was a currency she no longer trusted. But curiosity broke through the numbness. She rubbed the thick balm into her wrists that night and watched the swelling ease by morning. Not a miracle, just care. After that, she began to linger a little longer by the alley wall, eyes fixed on the lantern-lit shop across the way. The apothecary never called out, never intruded, but once, when she'd tried to turn back too quickly, her head low, he'd said, "You can sit a while if you want. There's no shame in needing air." His voice was quiet, firm. It wasn't coaxing. It wasn't pity. It was permission. Grace took it. She started sitting on the overturned crate that leaned half-buried against the fence. She never said much. Neither did he. But sometimes, when her hands wouldn't stop shaking, or when Madame's threats had curled like smoke in her mind all day, she'd find a cup left on the crate. Herbal tea, always warm, sometimes laced with honey. One night, she wept, soundless, shoulders curled in on themselves, face buried in her shawl. She thought she was alone, until she heard him say, not softly, but simply, "You don't belong there." She didn't answer, but something inside her, something long buried, stirred like embers under ash. The room above the apothecary was scarcely larger than a pantry. Low-beamed ceiling, a single brass-framed bed, a cracked window pane that rattled in the wind. But to Grace, it was a sanctuary. Not for its comfort. There was little of that. But for its stillness. No voices barking commands. No hands reaching without permission. No footsteps echoing with expectation. Just the steady hush of wind through the eaves and the muted sounds of mortar and pestle below. The morning after she moved in, she woke before the rooster. Habit, mostly. She sat on the edge of the bed with the thin quilt gathered around her knees, staring at her palms as though she might read a different story in their lines. They were calloused now, but hers. Not rented, not used, just hers. The apothecary's shop opened promptly at 8. Samuel was already grinding elder bark when she crept downstairs, unsure if she was to knock or wait or pretend not to exist. He didn't look up when he said, "Apron's by the door. If you want to help, you can start by sorting the chamomile from the dock route." Grace obeyed without a word. The work was slow but steady. Her fingers fumbled, unfamiliar with stems and textures, but he never corrected her sharply, only murmured, "That one's too old. Toss it," or "Pinch it near the base. See? It holds better." At midday, he handed her a slate and a piece of chalk. "Let's start with the bones," he said. "Latin first, then dosage. Spelling matters." She hadn't held a writing tool in over a year. Her hands cramped by the second sentence, but she kept going, pressing letters into the slate as though carving a new identity. Radix, cortex, tinctura. The words felt foreign, but they promised something real, something earned. That evening, he left a book outside her door. The Healer's Handbook, 2nd edition, well thumbed, pages annotated in the margins. Inside the front cover, penciled lightly, "Read slow, breathe slower. SB." Grace traced the initials like they were a secret she had been entrusted with. She didn't know what this new life would ask of her, or how long it would last before someone came knocking. But when she lay down that night and pulled the quilt to her chin, she didn't listen for danger. She listened for the steady sound of Samuel's footfalls below, the rhythm of a life that made room for her. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she slept without her shawl. By the time the tulips bloomed beneath the apothecary's window, Grace Holloway no longer walked like someone bracing for impact. Her shoulders, once curled like shutters against the world, now moved with purpose. Her hands, once trembling and raw, now measured tinctures and weighed herbs with the steadiness of a practiced healer. Behind the counter, she wore an apron streaked with chalk and lavender dust, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, the image not of a girl surviving, but of a woman becoming. Each morning began with bread kneaded in silence before dawn, its crust golden, its scent curling through the shop like a promise. She left a slice by Samuel's ledger with a dab of plum preserves, and he never said thank you. He didn't need to. The way he left out fresh pages in her ledger, or nodded once when she got a conversion exactly right, those were thanks enough. Customers came more often now, some traveling from 2 towns over. They lingered longer, asked after Miss Holloway, praised her poultices, her patience, her voice that smoothed even the sting of a boil remedy. She didn't offer stories, she offered presence, and it was enough. But the day the brothel girl arrived, limping, coat soaked from the river fog, was when Grace understood the weight of what she'd built. Her name was Annie, though she hadn't said it aloud in years. Her eyes flicked about like a cornered animal's. Samuel stepped back instinctively, deferring to Grace, and Grace, without blinking, without asking, opened the door and stepped aside. No fanfare, no judgment, just a gesture that said, "I remember." She fetched a towel, warmed stew, laid an extra quilt across the cot upstairs. She said only once, over tea, "You won't have to go back. Not while I've breath." The next day, when Tobias Crane arrived, all puffed chest and simmering threat, it was Grace who answered the door. She stood taller than he remembered, straighter, with ink-stained hands folded before her like a judge preparing a sentence. Samuel's voice came steady behind her, cool as creek water. "She's not yours. Not anymore." That evening, as dusk settled and the shop grew still, Grace lit a lantern and watched the flicker catch on the certificate above her workbench. Grace Holloway, certified apothecary assistant. Not a gift, not a favor, earned. She ran her fingers along its frame and whispered, "Not for anyone, just herself. I am not what was done to me. I am what I choose to build." Outside, spring pressed against the glass with green fingertips, and inside, Grace didn't just carry a new name. She had made it hers.